I've had a few requests from people to make something with the Moonshadow mists. So I'm going to make a vintage card using the burnished brass. This is one of my favourites because it looks a whole lot like walnut ink but with a shimmer. So to start with, I just need to shake the Moonshadow mist until all of this lovely mica in the bottom is mixed through. I'm just going to start by getting a nice even coverage across the face of the cardstock. And then just to add a little extra variation, I'm going to get in really close and just squirt in patches across the front here, so that some areas will have a little bit more spray and stain, a little bit more of that shimmer than others. Because I'd like this to be quite vintage looking, I need the colours to pool as they're drying. To get it to do that, I'm going to need to dry this with a heat gun. By moving this around, I'll end up with a much more interesting pattern of stains on the finished piece. If this isn't stained enough, you can always add a little bit more colour at this point. Wherever the Moonshadow mist pools, when you dry it with the heat gun, that's where you'll get the sort of edged watermark kind of look. Now, I've only used the burnished brass on this, so this is just the one colour of the Moonshadow mist. You get a huge variation of actual colour depending on how much you've sprayed on here, how you've dried it. To me this looks great. This is just the kind of vintage look I'm after. It even sounds like vintage paper after you've finished with it. It's a little crackly and dry. It's lovely. Again, you can see you've got that beautiful shimmer, but in addition you've got these lovely dye ink stains from drying it with the heat gun. So you may want this sometimes, like in this particular project. Other times you may not want these stains. That's when you air dry your piece. The next step for this particular piece is to add a little bit of the Vintage Photo Distress ink. And just take a little bit of this on the edge of your sponge. And I'm just going to rub it around the edges here. It's not really going to add a lot of colour, it's just going to deepen the colour. I don't want to cover the whole card with ink, so I'm just applying it in small patches. Or just adding extra depth to the background that I'm creating. I'm going to add a little black soot as well, but I'll have to use this quite sparingly. I don't want to take over the card. So just a little bit. Don't forget adding a circular motion. Alright, so that's about as much as I want to do to this. I just wanted to add a little extra depth to some of those areas to help, I suppose, make the brighter patches of this burnished brass background stand out a little bit more. Sometimes adding a little dark makes the light look even better. So that didn't actually take away any of that lovely shimmery background, and it's not coming off on my finger for all it's worth. So the Moonshadow mists, once they've been dried, and of course I did this one with a heat gun, that shimmer really isn't moving. The next step for this particular piece, using the Cuttlebug plate, and it's the vintage writing, I'm just going to run this through my big kick. Just follow the instructions on how to do this. Now what I love about this process is I can be really slack. I didn't actually need to flatten my cardstock because running it through the Cuttlebug did that for me. So the texture plate that I've used with the handwriting has actually also flattened my background piece. So that means I don't have to wait for it to flatten under books or iron it or anything else. Now because it didn't quite fit and I'd like to use this as a horizontal card in landscape format, what I've done is I ran it through this direction. Then I ran it through once more to emboss the piece that had been missed. This is where I'm going to get my black soot pad and I'm going to rub it across those raised areas here. Because I've also used it on the background, it's not going to be quite so stark a contrast. While it's drying, I'll show you the next piece that I've made that I'm going to use on the card here. This is a stamp from the Oxford Impressions range. So I've just stamped this in brown VersaFine ink on a piece of white cardstock, and then I've sprayed the burnished brass over the top. And yes, that was after I'd stamped. I've left it to dry in puddles, so I've encouraged it with the heat gun, and then I've just kind of wiped it with my finger over the edge of it. And then I've glued a mica pane over the front here. This is it close up. You can see that lovely stamp from Oxford Impressions, and you can see here where I've used the burnished brass and then dried it with the heat gun to get those lovely puddles. For me, this is just perfect for a vintage photo look. I think the layer of mica over the top of the image makes this look a lot like a tintype, so just perfect for a vintage photo. This is the card I've made using the Moonshadow mist background that I made earlier. You can see that you've got that lovely scripted, embossed, lovely raised section at the back of the card here. I've used the little panel that I created with that same colour of Moonshadow mist and covered in mica. Again, this stamp is from Oxford Impressions and the plate that it's from is Heart of Dixie. I've mounted this onto one of the Tim Holtz papers. This one was the bingo paper. And I've used a circle punch to punch a little hole here, and I've actually inserted a little bingo number in there. I've added one of the words from collections here. That one sort of matched, also mounted on contrasting red cardboard. I've used a small photo corner or photo turn here just to hold everything together. Little ruler up the side, a bit of black and red card to contrast, and then I had this absolutely neat button, and it's brass. I've covered it in glossy accents because it's sort of caved in a little bit. It really added to the look of the whole card. So I'll just give you a close-up view. You can see that lovely shimmery background from the Moonshadow mist. So this is the burnished brass Moonshadow mist that I've used on top of that stamped image there. It's that gorgeous button. And there's that lovely background I created using the Moonshadow mists. Just perfect for a vintage piece. And that's the finished card. If you'd like any more details, don't forget you can find these on my blog.